When you send a text to a friend, what do you mean? And I don't mean what words are you literally trying to say. I mean, what emotion are you trying to send? In most interactions, we send messages, but what we're really trying to send is a feeling. I've been thinking about this concept a lot recently, specifically because this weird culture war of messaging, blue bubbles versus green bubbles, or iOS versus Android, has been a lot louder this year than it usually is. I mean, this conversation's been going on forever, basically since iMessage first launched in 2011. But this year in particular, it seems like there's a lot more articles being written and a lot more tweet threads that are trending. But there was one particular article that made me stop and think I should probably look at this a little bit deeper. Why Apple's iMessage is winning, teens fear the green text bubble. There was a lot of your standard stuff in there, like how group messaging sucks if you have even one Android user in your thread, and how when you react to something on the iPhone, you end up with a page of reactions on the Android phone. But there was one particular statistic that really drove home for me how important the color of the text bubble has become to people. If you're between 18 and 24 and you live in the United States, there's now a 75% chance that you own an iPhone. That's up from about 45% just 5 years ago, a 30% increase in mobile operating system share in just 5 years, in probably the most valuable market to most of these companies. That's massive. So I started paying closer attention, and I noticed that every time that I switch from an iPhone to an Android phone, I start getting messages like this. And every time I switch back to an iPhone, I get messages like this. And for the longest time, I just found this to be such a weird phenomenon, such a visceral reaction to the color of my bubble. I mean, blue is not an inherently more valuable color than green. It's just a color. But even I have to admit that when I'm on an iPhone and a green message comes in, I get this small, weird sense of frustration. And I don't like that I feel that, because people are so much more than the color of a bubble. So my original intention for this video was to dig into why. What is the underlying catalyst that gives you such an instinctual reaction to those green bubbles, that makes you feel such an inherent sense of frustration when a bubble comes in that's a different color than you were expecting? At a higher level, there are some fairly obvious answers to this, mostly that iMessage is a rich communication service, which means that it sends information over the internet. That gives it access to things like reactions and inline replies and typing indicators and better group conversations. And when you text an Android phone, it gets switched back to SMS, which is an older, more archaic, less feature-rich standard. But I wanted to look just a little bit deeper. What is it about our human need for communication that makes us feel physically uncomfortable when we receive a color that we're not expecting? That makes my iPhone friends send me messages like that when I switch back to an Android phone? That causes a single app to give an operating system 30% market share in 5 years? What is it about our need for human interaction that makes this whole thing so frustrating for everyone involved? So I've been looking into this for a couple of months now, and what started as a look into the effect of a single color on our psyche kind of cascaded into a world war, a new mathematical theory of communication, and why I think that maybe computers were never even made for us in the first place. In the early 1940s, the world was in the middle of a conflict. And even if it didn't look like it, this was a war of information, encryption, secret messages. World War II was fought with foot soldiers, but this was really a battle of military intelligence, a war game that was driven by which side had superior intel. In those early periods, the US government was going college to college looking for the best minds in what at the time was considered electrical engineering. They needed to find people who knew how to keep top secret information secure, as well as people who knew how to break that top secret information wide open. And it was in these early periods that they stumbled upon a man named Claude Shannon. So I was looking into this guy, and it was pretty clear that he was gonna be a good candidate. He's got bachelor's degrees in math and electrical engineering. He's got a master's degree and a PhD from MIT. He was already kind of a big deal in the field at the time. But the people that know about him seem to regard him as the father of the information age, the reason that we have smartphones and the internet at all, up there with like Newton or Einstein in terms of importance. But what's weird is that I've never heard of him. I went to school for computer science and never heard of him once. I asked my other engineering friends, they'd never heard of him either. This guy seems to be a bit of an enigma. So when the government recruited him, Shannon had just published his master's thesis, a symbolic analysis of relays and switching circuits, which proved that Boolean algebra, the use of a 1 meaning true or a 0 meaning false, could be used to simplify pretty much all telecommunications relays, and those relays could also be used to solve Boolean algebra problems. Shannon had effectively invented the modern digital circuit, the component that runs most of our modern world. And he did this at the age of 22. But the government originally recruited him to work on anti-aircraft missile systems and fire control systems, things they needed in the immediate present and not these sweeping ideas for the future. But Shannon was clearly interested in pushing his information ideas forward. So while he was doing the grunt work that the government needed him to do, he was also quietly developing his next thesis. Now, with that first paper, Shannon had effectively created the logic board, a series of ones and zeros that, when put together, could create much more complex systems and solve various different types of problems. But building the logic board only solves about half the problem. Shannon's first paper outlined all the ways that the circuit itself could be simplified, but what about the information that runs through it? If you don't think about the efficiency of the information actually traveling through that system, you're still going to be left with an inefficient system. That's like designing the most efficient freeways, but not thinking about the efficiency of the cars. So in 1948, Shannon published a new paper that he'd been quietly working on throughout the course of the war. A paper that would change the way that we communicate, that would lay the foundation for the entire information age. A mathematical theory of communication. So there's a lot of ideas packed into this 45-page paper, but at the heart of it are a few core concepts that all of these other ideas are packed on top of. Fundamentals that help define how we send information across practically any channel. And maybe the reason that this blue bubble versus green bubble thing even exists in the first place. Let's break it down. This schematic outlines how information is transferred across any system. It works with speech, light, or sound, anything that transfers information from one place to another. And as Shannon put it in his paper, this flowchart is a function of time and other variables. That's what it's meant to be, the fundamental building blocks of how we move information across any channel over any period of time. I know this all might seem a little bit complicated, but believe me, I'm bad at math. And as it turns out, this is all actually pretty simple to understand. I mean, it is supposed to be the building blocks of how we send information. Now, this video is supposed to be about text messaging, and we'll get back to that, I promise. So let's use a text message as an example. All right, so first you've got the information source, the beginning of this information system. In this case, that information source is me. I've got something that I'm trying to communicate to you, an idea that I'm trying to send. But to do that, I'm gonna need a transmitter for that information. Now, when we talk about texting, we're generally talking about words on a screen, things that you can read on your phone that communicate an idea. So in this case, that transmitter is gonna be my fingers and the phone itself. Those inputs are going through my fingers and into the device. And then that device can transmit that information through a channel. Now in this case, that channel is the wireless network. My text has to be sent through the waves in the air to a cell tower and then routed to you. But the problem with almost any channel is it's not perfect. In pretty much any channel, from communication to chemistry or physics, there's always going to be potential for entropy and noise, randomness and interference that's totally out of your control. If you've ever got a text that had some parts of the message backwards or maybe just missing, that would be this. There's this chance that that channel you're sending the information through just won't get to the other side exactly as you sent it. But then it gets to the receiver. That's the thing that catches that information that you're sending over the channel. So in this case, it's your phone. The device is receiving the information on the other end and displaying it on your screen. And then finally, you've got the destination. And in this case, that's you. You're finally receiving that information that I put out into the world, and the system is complete. Now, I know it might seem like this flowchart is pretty specific to telecommunications, but it works with pretty much any form of information transfer, from shouting to smoke signals. We can use something even more basic. Let's just say you're having a conversation with your friend. You've got the information source, which is you. You've got the transmitter, which is your vocal cords. You've got the channel, which is the vibrations in the air. You got the entropy and noise, maybe in this case, literally, there's a car driving by, or maybe your throat hurts a little bit, you can't articulate correctly. Then you've got the receiver, which is your friend's ears. And finally, you've got the destination, which is your friend. Channel is complete. This system, along with some other fundamentals in this paper, make up information theory, the very foundation of how we send information across space. It works with foot couriers and smoke signals and texting and the internet. Pretty much any method of information transfer can be reduced to the fundamentals in this paper. And the cool thing about reduction, breaking something as basic as information transfer down to its fundamentals, is that you can trace it back to its roots and then branch out from there. You can optimize that system. So how do you make the most efficient car to travel across the most efficient freeway? Now, we got to remember that back in the 1930s and 1940s, information was expensive. It wasn't like today where you could just write paragraphs upon paragraphs of text or lines and lines of code and it didn't really matter. Back then, every single bit mattered. And especially during a period of war, the time that it took to encode a message, send it through the channel, and decode a message could literally be the difference between life and death. So messages needed to be short, they needed to transfer quickly, and they needed to be exact. Hey, what's up? John told me to tell you that there might be a missile coming your way. We think that maybe it could be coming from the west. Can you imagine if someone had to encode that, send that through a channel, and decode that over something like Morse code? I mean, that would be a pretty big problem. Instead, it would probably be a lot simpler to just say something like missile west. I mean, even SOS is a shortened way to say something that's a lot longer. There's so much information coded into those 3 letters, and it's a lot easier to send over a telegraph. So if information is expensive and time sensitive, how do we optimize the information that's being sent over that channel? There's a couple different ways. First is the information density. Think about SOS again. There's so much information being sent over those 3 letters. And Shannon even defined mathematical models that can give different weights to different letters and words that allow you to create the most information-dense sentences possible to transfer an idea. Different words and letters encode different amounts of information. So if you can optimize the information density, you can optimize the information being sent over the channel. And that's something called channel capacity. And Shannon specifically defined channel capacity as the highest rate of information that can travel through a given channel at arbitrarily low error rates. Because information needs to travel quickly, but it also needs to travel accurately. You've got to account for that entropy and noise within that channel. I mean, you don't want your enemy scrambling your message. You've got to account for that. These ideas of optimization eventually became the foundation for so much of the future. I mean, so much of computer science is just trying to figure out the optimal way to code something in the cleanest, most efficient way possible. And you might not even realize it, but so many of the systems that we use today are based around these ideas of optimization. I mean, think back to when you had your T9 flip phone and you only had a certain number of characters that you could send per text, and then you only had a certain number of texts that you could send per month. I mean, I'm constantly trying to optimize my tweets, switching around words and using shorthand to fit in those 280 characters. When the channel you're sending information through is limited, you have to work really hard to send those ideas in the most efficient way possible. The original Super Mario Bros. Fit in 32 kilobytes of storage. There's this famous story where Pokemon Gold and Silver were going to be way smaller games, but someone came in and optimized them so well, they were able to add Kanto back in alongside Johto. Especially in the early days of computing, efficiency was everything. But here's the big thing, and maybe the reason that texting sucks so much as a form of communication. Humans are not efficient beings at all. We write books that are thousands of pages in length. We make movies that are 3-4 hours. We tell long, winding stories. And it's really rare that any of these things are concise. They don't need to be. They're not code that's meant to be executed. They're emotions that are meant to be shared. I mean, think about this. If I text you, hey, do you want to grab some coffee at the cafe later? maybe around 6. There is some literal information encoded in there, namely the time and the place, but what am I really saying to you? The coffee is clearly not the important thing here. Maybe we had a falling out and I'm reaching out to try to mend that relationship. Or maybe I've got some exciting news that I want to share with you in person. Words are these literal Boolean concepts. They're these things that were created by humans to communicate an idea. But it's the emotion that's attached to those words that is completely dictated by the context of a relationship. I could send the exact same text message to 10 different people, and the emotion that is communicated with those words would be completely different. But is emotion mathematical? I mean, Shannon's theory has defined how we send information over a channel, but do they define how we communicate? We're not concise and efficient as you have to be in war. We are long-winded and artistic and complex. And it's this idea that made me think that maybe Shannon's paper was mistitled. A Mathematical Theory of Communication. Information theory. I mean, communication involves information. It's a core part of it. But human communication is not just information. It's information plus emotion. So with that in mind, maybe Shannon's paper should have been called A Mathematical Theory of Information. If you want to define how we actually communicate, you've got to add that emotional element back in. An entropic variable constant that is different for literally every relationship. A constant that turns information theory into communication theory, a real mathematical theory of communication. So I guess that brings me back to the point of this video. What is it about the green bubble that makes people so uncomfortable? That makes my friends so distressed when I switch to an Android phone and overjoyed when I switch back? After going down this rabbit hole for the last couple of months, I think the answer is this. Even if it wasn't incredibly obvious in the 1930s and the 1940s, information theory and the papers that defined it would be some of the most important bodies of work to come out of the 20th century. They laid the foundation for pretty much all computing, and maybe more importantly, the way that we share information. And the shared existence of humanity now takes place just as much in a digital sense as it does in a physical sense. But those theories are fundamentally binary. They're ideas based on Boolean algebra. They simplify more complex ideas into ones and zeros, truths and falsehoods, yes and no. And while they define the most efficient way to send information across a channel, they didn't define how we actually communicate. So everything that was born from those ideas was also based on efficiency across a channel and not our interpersonal relationships. In most communication, that emotional element becomes much more obvious and more established the more we use our other methods of communication. Think about your body language, the expressions on your face, the intonation in your voice. We have so many ways to communicate that emotional element. The channel capacity for information in a text might be high, but what about the channel capacity for emotion? What about the element of communication that actually encapsulates what we're trying to say? In a text, the words are only half the story. It's the context, the emotional element, that really communicates what we mean. But iMessage is a rich communication service. It works over the internet, which means its users have access to things like reactions and typing indicators and high-quality image and video support and memoji and rich group conversations. These are all things that amplify the emotional efficiency across that channel. While you're not getting the same benefits as human-to-human interaction, a rich communication service just has a much higher emotional efficiency than SMS. It's a much better method of communication. I mean, reactions say so much more than the words that they sit on top of. A heart reaction could say, I hear you, it could say, I love you, or it could just be a way to say that you saw a message. Typing indicators can help indicate presence. They can give that sense that you're right there with the person. You're having a constant conversation and not just like a series of delayed relays. Inline replies let you have multiple conversations at once. High quality image and video support can help you share your world with a person. And even something like memoji can help add a personalized facial expression, which helps increase the emotional efficiency of your message. These rich communication features are like an extension of your vocabulary. They're not literal like text, but they help you fill in for the emotional element that you normally get when you're having a face-to-face conversation. I mean, would a memoji ever be used during a war? Would a GIF? These are inherently informationally inefficient, but they are emotionally efficient, and they help us communicate. But the problem is that Apple's iMessage is one of the only rich messaging protocols that isn't platform agnostic. That means if you're messaging another iPhone user, you're using iMessage. But as soon as you message an Android phone, you're kicked back to SMS, this older, less feature-rich standard. So if you're an iMessage user and you see that green bubble, that's a signal to your brain that you're about to have your emotional capacity reduced significantly. You can't use inline replies. Your group conversations are gonna suck. You can't use reactions or memoji or have high quality images or video. And all of these things add up, these frustrations over not being fully heard. I know it might not seem like a big deal if a text is reverted to SMS, but imagine how it would feel to have half of your vocabulary ripped away. Imagine you're able to use the full breadth of language with some friends, but only half of it with others. And over time, these frustrations become inextricably linked with the color of your bubble. And then we end up here, with 75% of the young people in the US owning an iPhone, because it allows them to communicate how they really feel. So if you're wondering why people care so much about the color of your bubble, this is probably why. And this isn't to say that I agree at all that it has to be this way. As you might remember at the top of this video, part of the reason this conversation has gotten so loud this year is because Google's been pushing Apple to support RCS, an open rich communication standard that Apple could easily add to their Messages app if they wanted to. RCS would allow iPhone and Android users to share in this rich communication. They could do things like have inline replies and reactions and rich group conversations and high quality image and video support. RCS wouldn't include everything that's been added to iMessage over the years, but it would help end the classism that was born from the color of a single bubble. But of course, it's more complicated than that. There are a lot of valid reasons why Google wants Apple to add support for RCS, and some valid reasons why Apple probably doesn't want to. Like pretty much everything in life, it's pretty nuanced. And for my day job, I actually helped make an explainer video that goes way deeper into this topic. So I guess I'll drop a link or something in the description if you want to check that out. But you know, funny enough, while I was in the process of writing this video, something pretty interesting happened. If you've ever used an Android phone before, you're probably aware that when an iPhone user reacts to one of your SMS messages, it'll send a whole separate message that describes the reaction. It might say something like, "This user loved this message," or "This user emphasized this message." If you haven't seen it before, it looks like this. This got pretty frustrating because you could pretty quickly end up with a whole page of these reaction descriptors. But the problem was the Android phone couldn't just not notify you that the iPhone user had sent that reaction, because then there's an emotional disconnect. You're basically making the best of a terrible situation. So recently, Google tried to solve the problem manually to help increase the emotional efficiency between an iPhone and an Android phone. It would stamp a little reaction emoji on the corner of your message instead of sending you a whole separate text. Cool. At first, that seems great. I mean, it's frustrating that you can't send a reaction back, but it's better than getting pages and pages of these typed out reaction descriptors. But sometimes when you try to solve one problem, you end up with more problems, and that's definitely what happened here. I mean, a couple of these translations are pretty much as accurate as you could make them. They're direct conversions from iPhone reactions to an emoji stamped on the Android text. But some of them are less so. The haha reaction translates to a laugh crying emoji. The question mark translates to a thinking emoji. I mean, as hard as Google tried, these emojis just don't have the exact same emotional context as the reactions that are being sent from the iPhone. And maybe the worst offender of all of these is the heart reaction being translated to heart eyes on Android phones. I know this might not seem like a big deal, but it's actually a huge problem. I mean, imagine you're on an iPhone and you're having a conversation with your Android friend. You ask them how they are, and they say, "Doing all right, my dog died the other day, but we're working through it." In this context, a heart emoji might be appropriate because it can imply that you're there for them. But then the Android user gets a heart eyes emoji, and I mean, that's not appropriate at all. There's a completely different emotion that's being received by the receiver than was sent from the information source. Now, to be fair to Google, not all of iMessage's reactions have emojis they can directly translate to. There is no ha-ha emoji right now, but there is a heart emoji, so they probably should have used that. Now, what's crazy about all of this is that plenty of other rich communication services exist, and they're all cross-platform. You've got things like Facebook Messenger and Telegram and WhatsApp. And in pretty much any country outside of the United States, these rich communication services are the default. I mean, WhatsApp alone has over 2 billion installs worldwide. That's over a quarter of the planet. But for some reason, in the United States, we're obsessed with using the default apps on our phones. And the default messaging app on the iPhone is the Messages app, and by extension, iMessage. So I guess this is where we're at. Until Apple adds support for RCS, which I don't see happening anytime soon, we're gonna be left with this emotional disconnect, this culture war between the blue bubble and the green bubble. This culture that suddenly promotes that 75% metric to get higher and higher. Because at the end of the day, phones are all about communication. And whichever OS has better emotional efficiency, whichever app has better communication theory, that's the OS that's gonna win out in the end. Thanks for watching. Guess I'll catch you guys next time I've got something to say. See ya.